Hey everyone, ready to tackle a topic we all struggle with at some point. We're diving into procrastination today, and not just the surface stuff. We're going deep into the psychology of why we do it, and more importantly, how to actually break free. So if you're tired of feeling guilty about those unfinished tasks and ready for some real strategies, this deep dive is for you. Our guide for this journey is Dr. Hayden Finch, a clinical psychologist who's got a knack for making research actually relatable. She lays it all out in her book, The Psychology of Procrastination.
What I appreciate about Dr. Finch's approach is that she doesn't just skim the surface. She really digs into the nitty-gritty of how our brains are wired, the emotions involved, and how even our perception of time plays a role.
Right. It's like, sometimes I feel like I need a PhD just to understand my own to-do list.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into the sciencey stuff, let's start with the basics. When we say procrastination, what are we really talking about? Because it's more than just putting things off, right? There's got to be more to it.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not just about being lazy or lacking willpower, although it can certainly feel that way sometimes. Dr. Finch makes a really important distinction in her book. She says procrastination hinges on intent. It's not just delaying something, it's delaying something you actually intended to do.
So, like, if I haven't gotten around to cleaning out my closet, that's not necessarily procrastination.
Exactly, not unless you actually had a plan to clean it out. Procrastination is about that disconnect between intention and action.
That's a really helpful distinction. And it makes me realize that procrastination isn't just about deadlines or work stuff. It pops up in every area of life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Think about it. Those chores that keep piling up, those bills you haven't opened yet, even putting off that new exercise routine you were so gung-ho about. Procrastination can rear its head in relationships too, like when we avoid those difficult conversations or drag our feet on making plans.
Ugh, don't even get me started. I'm the queen of relationship procrastination. But you know what else I'm really good at? That thing Dr. Finch calls procrastinating. You know, when you suddenly feel the urge to bake a three-tiered cake when you have a deadline looming.
Classic. It's like our brains find these really creative ways to feel productive without actually tackling the thing we're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. Or how about this, spending hours creating the perfect to-do list, color-coded and categorized down to the minute, but then never actually doing any of the tasks?
Oh, I've been there. It's that illusion of productivity that trips us up.
Totally. So it's not just about doing something, it's about doing the right thing. And this is where Dr. Finch's distinction between being a procrastinator and someone who simply procrastinates is really helpful. It's not about labeling ourselves, right? It's more about recognizing that we all fall somewhere on a spectrum.
Exactly. We all procrastinate to some degree. It's a normal human behavior. But for some people, it becomes a chronic pattern that can really interfere with their lives.
Okay, so that's reassuring to know. It's not about being good or bad at this whole procrastination thing. It's more about understanding our own tendencies and then figuring out how to manage them. But before we jump into solutions, I'm curious about something else. Dr. Finch mentioned passive versus active procrastination. What's the difference?
That's a great question. It's another one of those distinctions that can really help us understand our own procrastination style. Passive procrastination is when we delay a task because we haven't made a decision about it yet. We're stuck in that analysis paralysis mode.
So it's like that feeling of being frozen.
Yeah.
You know what you should be doing, but you can't seem to pull the trigger.
Exactly. On the other hand, active procrastination is more of a deliberate choice. It's that I work better under pressure mentality, where you intentionally wait until the last minute to get that adrenaline rush.
Ah, the thrill of the deadline. Guilty is charged on that one.
Hmm.
But whether we're passive procrastinators or active procrastinators, it sounds like there's a deeper cycle at play here. So let's unravel that a bit more, shall we? So we've talked about how procrastination isn't just about being lazy, it's this whole cycle. But what keeps us stuck in that cycle? Like, why does one day of putting things off turn into a week? And then a month, and then bam, it's been years, and that someday project is still just an idea.
It's like we're stuck on a hamster wheel, right? And Dr. Finch calls this interplay of factors that keeps us spinning the procrastination cocktail.
Okay, procrastination cocktail. That sounds both dangerous and intriguing. What exactly goes into this potent mix?
Well, first, there's our brain. Our brains are actually wired to seek immediate gratification. So every time we choose to watch another episode of that show we're binging, instead of tackling that report, our brain gets a little hit of dopamine. That's that feel-good neurotransmitter. And who doesn't love feeling good?
Right, so our own brain chemistry is working against us. No wonder it's so hard to resist those temptations to procrastinate. But it's not just our brains, though, right? Dr. Finch also talks about how our emotions play a big role.
Absolutely. Think about it. We're wired to avoid uncomfortable things.
Mm.
And procrastination, it's like this master escape artist when it comes to dodging those icky feelings, whether it's boredom, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, you name it, procrastination swoops in and says, nope, not dealing with that today.
Okay, but how does avoiding those feelings keep us stuck in the procrastination cycle? It's not like those feelings magically
So
disappear, right?
exactly. The thing is, when we procrastinate, we get this temporary relief from those uncomfortable feelings. We tell ourselves, okay, I'll feel more like doing it tomorrow, but then guess what? Tomorrow rolls around and those feelings are still there.
And we end up right back where we started, procrastinating again. It's like a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle. We get so used to seeking that temporary relief that we never actually deal with the root of the problem.
It's like we're constantly hitting the snooze button on our responsibilities.
And speaking of time, that's actually another key ingredient in this procrastination cocktail.
Oh, right. Dr. Finch talks about how bad we are at judging how long things will actually take.
We are terrible time managers. We overestimate how much time we have, underestimate how long tasks will take. It's a recipe for procrastination disaster.
Like that classic saying, work expands to fill the time allotted. We think we have tons of time, so we put things off. And then, boom, we're scrambling at the last minute, stressed, overwhelmed, and the quality of our work probably takes a hit too, right?
Exactly. We end up rushing, making mistakes, or not putting our best foot forward, and then we might even beat ourselves up about it, adding fuel to that procrastination fire.
So not only are we procrastinating, but then we're layering on guilt and self-criticism on top of it. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for staying stuck, that's for sure. But the good news is, once we understand this cycle, this dance between our brain's emotions and our wonky perception of time, we can start to break free.
Okay, so we've dissected the problem. We know what we're up against. Now let's talk about solutions. What does Dr. Finch recommend we actually do to break free from this procrastination cycle? Okay, so we've gotten real about the downsides of procrastination and how this cycle, fueled by our brains, emotions, and even our perception of time, can really mess things up for us. But the big question is, how do we actually break free? Give us the good stuff. What's the secret sauce Dr. Finch uses to combat this universal struggle?
Well, before we dive into solutions, let's address the elephant in the room. There's no magic bullet, no overnight fix. Dr. Finch is crystal clear about that. Overcoming procrastination takes effort, consistent work, and a healthy dose of self-awareness. But here's the good news at IS Possible. Her book is packed with strategies rooted in science, not just some fluffy self-help jargon.
Okay, that's a relief. I'm all for ditching the guilt trip and getting practical. What are some of the biggest myths about beating procrastination that we should just toss out the window right now?
One of the biggest culprits is the just do it mentality. It sounds great in theory, but it completely disregards the emotional root of the problem. You can't just willpower your way through something if you're avoiding it because it triggers anxiety or makes you feel totally overwhelmed. It's like telling someone with a fear of spiders to just chill out around them. Not very helpful, right?
So true. You've got to address the root cause, not just the symptom. So it's not just about white-knuckling our way through it. What about the idea that better time management is the key to conquering procrastination?
While having good organizational skills is definitely helpful, it doesn't address the emotional and psychological factors driving us to procrastinate in the first place. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm. It might cover the problem temporarily, but it doesn't actually fix anything.
That makes a lot of sense. We need to address those underlying feelings and thought patterns, not just try to mask them with a better calendar app. So what are some of Dr. Finch's key strategies that we can start using today to tackle the root of the issue?
One of the most powerful tools she offers is self-compassion. It sounds simple, but it's huge. Instead of beating ourselves up for procrastinating, we need to treat ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we'd offer a friend who is struggling. You wouldn't berate a friend for procrastinating, would you?
Absolutely not. In fact, I'd probably be baking them cookies and telling them it's okay to take a break. But we'd never speak to ourselves with that same level of compassion. So how do we actually practice self-compassion when we're knee-deep in procrastination guilt?
Dr. Finch suggests a powerful exercise. Try writing a letter to yourself from the perspective of a compassionate friend. What would that friend say to you? Offer words of encouragement. Remind yourself that everyone makes mistakes and that this doesn't define you.
That's such a great idea. Sometimes we need to hear those kind words even if they come from ourselves. And speaking of kindness to ourselves, Finch also talks about this reframing rewards technique, shifting our focus from the dread of the task to the positive feeling of accomplishment we'll experience once it's done.
Exactly. Our brains have a negativity bias, meaning they're naturally drawn to dwell on the negative, but we can hack this system by consciously focusing on the positive. Imagine how good it will feel to finally check that task off your to-do list. How much lighter you'll feel when it's no longer hanging over your head. Let that positive anticipation fuel your motivation.
Love it. It's like giving ourselves a motivational carrot instead of a procrastination stick. So we've got self-compassion and reframing rewards. What other practical tips does Dr. Finch offer?
Creating structure and routines is another game changer. It doesn't have to be rigid, but having some consistency in your day can work wonders. It's like setting up guardrails for your brain, helping it conserve energy for decision making and reducing the temptation to procrastinate.
So it's like having a loose plan in place. Takes the pressure off our brains from having to constantly make choices, freeing up mental energy to actually focus on the tasks at hand. That makes a lot of sense. Any other helpful hints?
Another practical tip is to break down those daunting tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. This reduces the feeling of overwhelm, which is a major procrastination trigger.
Okay, this is all fantastic advice, but I know our listeners are all unique, and what works for one person might not work for another. Does Dr. Finch acknowledge that there's no one-size-fits-all solution?
Absolutely. She emphasizes that her book is a toolbox, not a prescription. She encourages readers to identify their personal procrastination style and experiment with different strategies to find what works best for them. For example, if you struggle with getting started, focus on techniques like the 5-minute rule. Commit to working on the task for just 5 minutes and see what happens. You'll often find that once you get started, the momentum keeps you going.
That's such a good point. It's about finding what works for you, not trying to fit yourself into some rigid mold.
hmm
So it's not about implementing every strategy at once, but rather starting with one or two that resonate with you and building from there. What I love about Dr. Finch's approach is that it's all about empowering us to understand our own procrastination patterns and then giving us the tools to actually break free.
Precisely. And one final thought-provoking idea from the book. Dr. Finch mentions how our brains are wired to conserve energy as a survival mechanism. So she poses the question, what if, on a deeper level, procrastination is your brain's way of trying to protect you from something? Maybe it's fear of failure, anxiety about success, or perhaps something else entirely. It's a fascinating concept and one worth exploring further.
That's such a powerful question to ponder. It's a great reminder that sometimes procrastination might be a symptom of a deeper issue, something we need to address with self-compassion and curiosity. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the psychology of procrastination, remember this: you are not alone in this struggle and there is hope. You have the power to understand your habits and rewire your relationship with procrastination. Start by trying one new technique this week and see what happens. Small changes can lead to remarkable results.